The movie begins with Jess trying to calm her son Tommy after a nightmare. The next day, after cleaning up a mess Tommy made, someone suddenly rings the doorbell. When Jess checks, she doesn't see anyone and asks her neighbor if he saw anyone, but he responds that he didn't. She then gets into the car to take her son to school. Next, we see Sally arriving with her husband Downey and their friend Heather. She greets Greg and says she brought a friend for him to meet. He then greets Heather, but at that moment he sees Jess arriving with Victor and decides to approach her. When Greg hugs Jess, he notices something is off, and she mentions that she's just tired, but she still prefers to go on the trip. Moments later, we see Jess sleeping on a beach. She suddenly wakes up, realizing it was a dream. Heather informs Jess that she slept for many hours, and Jess reveals that she had a terrible dream. To help relieve the stress, Heather offers Jess some champagne as they go up. Heather offers Greg some champagne, but he declines, preferring to talk to Jess and teach her how to steer the boat. Meanwhile, Sally is talking to Heather, encouraging her to chat with Greg because she thinks the two of them are a good match. Sally also doesn't like seeing Greg with Jess. Greg tells Jess how he met each person there and then reveals that the only reason he's there is because he wanted to invite Jess to go sailing. Minutes later, they notice the sky darkening, signaling an approaching storm. Greg hurries to contact the Coast Guard, but the call fails. Realizing the storm is getting closer, Jess, Downey, Sally, and Heather go below deck to grab life jackets, while Victor and Greg try to take action but are unsuccessful. Water soon starts flooding the boat, then a huge wave hits, capsizing the boat. Afterward, Sally frantically informs the group that Heather is missing. Once the storm passes, they drift for hours until they suddenly spot a large ship and start shouting for help. However, Jess notices something strange about the ship. As they board the vessel, Sally hopes to find Heather there. They enter an area of the ship, calling out to see if anyone is there, but realize it's empty. While walking down a corridor, Jess has a sense that she's been there before. It feels like déjà vu to her. Meanwhile, Downey and Victor discover a portrait of the ship they're on, dated 1932, with the name Aeolus, referencing the Greek god who controls the storms. As they start to leave, they hear a noise, prompting Greg and Victor to investigate. Victor finds a key, and Jess immediately recognizes it as hers, pointing out that it holds the keys to her house, car, and even a photo of her son. Sally suggests that Heather might have brought the key and that she's still alive. After this, they enter a large, empty ballroom filled with chairs and food as if a party is about to happen. Jess then notices something strange. The time on her watch doesn't match Greg's. Jess asks where everyone is, and Greg believes someone else is on board and that they aren't alone. Suddenly, Jess spots someone and alerts the group. Victor goes after the person, while Sally, wanting to know if it was Heather, asks Jess, but Jess couldn't see clearly. Greg goes off to search for Victor and Jess follows. On the way, Jess warns Greg that Victor is in danger because she's experiencing déjà vu and knows the place. However, Greg doesn't believe she's familiar with the ship and thinks she's just scared. After hearing a noise, Greg and Jess enter a bathroom, where Jess sees the words, "Go to the theater," written in blood on the mirror. Jess warns Greg about the writing on the mirror, but he doesn't take it seriously, dismissing it as a prank. At that moment, Jess says she's leaving, and Greg again suggests that the things she's worried about only happen in her own world. Jess turns to him and replies that her world is her son, who is out there at school waiting for his mother. Meanwhile, Sally and Downey are searching for Heather when Sally notices some bloodstains. As they enter the theater, Sally remarks that she doesn't see any more blood and that Heather isn't there. Downey, trying to manage his wife's expectations, tells her that Heather might not even be on the ship. Jess goes to the ballroom and finds Victor, who is injured. As she approaches him, Victor attacks Jess and knocks her to the ground, but she manages to free herself. Realizing what Victor has done, Jess becomes frantic. Suddenly, she hears a gunshot coming from the theater. When she goes to investigate, she finds Greg injured. Sally, furious, accuses Jess of shooting Greg, but Jess denies it, explaining that she was with Victor. Downey then says Jess sent them to the theater. As Jess denies the accusation, someone shoots Sally and Downey. Jess runs to hide and sees that the shooter is a masked person. Jess tries to save Sally, but the masked attacker fires again. Jess takes the opportunity to escape and manages to reach the ship's kitchen. As she grabs a knife, she hears the masked person's footsteps approaching, but the attacker eventually leaves. Jess exits the area, only to be suddenly attacked by the masked figure. She manages to get up and run, finding a place to hide. The masked attacker continues to shoot, but eventually runs out of ammunition. Jess seizes this chance to grab an axe. She encounters the masked person again, and they begin to fight once more before being thrown off the ship. The masked person tells Jess that she has to kill them. Jess feels relieved to have gotten rid of the attacker. However, when she is in front of a mirror, she hears voices of people. As she goes out to investigate, she is horrified to see her friends and herself on the boat, asking for help. She realizes she is trapped in a loop. When Jess looks again, she realizes that her friends are already inside the ship, which makes her run to hide. While her friends search for someone, Jess hears the same conversation from her other self, saying she knows the place. In her panic, Jess drops her key on the ground, which reveals what happened earlier. She then runs and goes back into the bathroom, where she sees the same phrase written on the mirror. Go to the theater. Jess heads to the ballroom, where she sees her other self, but then she runs upstairs and spots Downey's body in the sea, surrounded by seagulls. Victor finds Jess and is amazed at how quickly she arrived. Jess tries to explain what's happening and mentions her duplicate, and attempts to show Downey in the sea. However, Victor only sees seagulls. Jess uses an apple to scare the seagulls away, but Downey's body disappears. Jess tries to convince Victor that there are copies of them scattered around the ship, but he continues to not understand. While attempting to explain, she accidentally hits Victor's head against the wall, which frightens her and causes her to enter an area where she starts to lose her sanity. There, she finds several papers with the message, "If they board, kill them all." Jess also writes this phrase herself. Afterward, Jess opens a cabinet and finds a gun as well as several of her own necklaces, each with a photo of her son, which terrifies her even more. Jess finds her other self with Victor in the ballroom. She points the gun at her duplicate but can't bring herself to shoot, and the other Jess runs away. As Jess approaches Victor to help him, she hears gunshots and heads to the theater to save Downey and Sally from the masked attacker. Jess tells Downey and Sally that she'll go get Victor so they can leave and warns them not to trust anyone who appears. Jess returns to the ballroom and sees more bloodstains. Following them, she goes to the upper part of the ship and looks at the water. She then hears more gunshots, realizing they are coming from Downey, who is shooting. It's revealed that the masked attacker is actually an evil version of Jess. The evil version of Jess appears to Downey and Sally, telling them to follow her. Meanwhile, the good Jess is desperately searching for them, warning that they are in danger. The evil Jess takes Downey and Sally to a room, grabs a knife and attacks them. While the evil Jess attacks Downey, Sally seizes the opportunity to escape, despite her injuries. The good Jess follows Sally as she flees. The chase continues because Sally believes the good Jess is the evil one. Sally enters a room with a microphone and tries to call for help, but the signal isn't working properly. Minutes later, the good Jess finds the injured Sally and several lifeless copies of Sally on the ship. She approaches and tries to explain that she wasn't the one who attacked them. At that moment, she sees her other self attacking the evil Jess and throwing her into the sea. Sally dies once again. Jess then sees the scene replaying with herself and others asking for help. She realizes that this happens every time someone dies. Desperate, Jess tries to stop the ship but fails and breaks down in tears, wishing to go back home. Then Jess sees her other self from earlier talking to Victor about leaving the ship. Jess realizes she needs to act. She goes to the bathroom and writes, "Go to the theater," then throws Downey into the sea. She heads to the ballroom and tells Sally and Downey to go to the theater. Jess grabs a gun, puts on a mask, and follows Greg to the theater. She points the gun at him and Greg recognizes her, asking why she's like this. Jess explains that she doesn't want him to see her face. Greg begs Jess to lower the gun, but she ends up shooting him. After this, Jess becomes the evil version of herself and continues shooting at those below. The scenes then replay with the evil Jess attacking the other Jess. Afterward, Jess flees and the two Jesses engage in a fight. The evil Jess tells the other Jess that they will return and that if she wants to see her son again, she will have to kill everyone. Jess is then thrown into the sea. Moments later, she is on the shore and is hit by the water, reminiscent of one of the film's opening scenes. Jess then leaves the beach, searching for help. We see her running towards her house. She spots her son and also sees another version of herself mistreating him. Jess rings the doorbell to distract the other Jess and then enters the house with a tool. Once inside, the other Jess attacks her, and the son is frightened by the confrontation. Jess grabs her son to try to calm him. Recalling the beginning of the story, Jess then puts her son in the car and drives away. She explains to him that she didn't do the things he saw. Suddenly, a seagull crashes into the car window, leaving a bloody stain. Jess checks and is shocked to find several more seagulls. She quickly returns to the car, telling her son that they need to get out of there. The boy starts crying when he sees the blood on the car window. As Jess turns to talk to him, she ends up colliding with a truck, causing an accident. People gather around them and nearby, Jess watches everything unfold. A man approaches her, introducing himself as a driver and offering her a ride. Jess accepts, saying she wants to go to the port. When she arrives at the port, she finds everyone there again, revealing that she is still trapped in the loop. Let's do a brief analysis. Most of the story takes place on a mysterious, abandoned ship, which symbolizes the limbo Jess is trapped in. The dark, secret-filled ship mirrors Jess's confusion and desperation as she tries to figure out what's happening. As events start to repeat themselves, the film creates a dense atmosphere of mystery and suspense, making the audience uneasy and questioning whether there is truly a way out for Jess from this terrifying situation. Additionally, the narrative explores deep themes of guilt and punishment, suggesting that Jess might be stuck in an endless cycle as a way to confront the consequences of her past actions. This repetitive cycle emphasizes the idea that the limbo she is in could be a form of facing and perhaps redeeming her mistakes, highlighting the concept that punishment can be as endless as the guilt that caused it, carrying the weight of something she did that still haunts her. And if you want to know what happened to a group of women who traveled to a farm for a bachelorette party, click on the video that's appearing. If you want to see more movie summaries, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and comment on the movie genres you'd like me to bring to the channel.